It was an otherwise quiet morning in the tiny village of Nami, Korea, near Pyongyang, 1919. A Christian schoolteacher, Kim Hyung-jik, his wife, and 3 young boys gathered to pray over a humble meal. Kim's wife, Kang Pan-sok, tussled with his youngest son, who found it endlessly entertaining to smear handfuls of barley into his hair. He felt an impulse to chuckle, but found himself worried over the icy look about his eldest, 7-year-old Kim Sung-ju. It was a distant, resigned look he'd seen more of over the past weeks, and wondered if the things the boy had seen were finally robbing him of his innocence. He didn't need to wonder long. As they began to eat, the door sprang open, and a despondent young man stumbled in. His face was badly beaten and bloody. His hands were swollen and discolored, with the fingers bent and unnaturally twisted. Kim rushed to the door to catch the young man as he collapsed. They cleared a space for him on the floor and dressed his wounds. As he lost consciousness, he uttered a word that Kim dreaded hearing. It was a word that had haunted him for the past 10 years.
Kim may die.
An hour later, when the man came to, he told them the story of how the Kinpei-tai, Japanese secret police, had snatched him out of his classroom and questioned him for hours. They were investigating rumors of a schoolteacher inciting rebellion and plotting against the emperor. He recounted how they'd strapped his hands between iron bars and cranked the straps, tightening the bars until the bones in his hands were crushed. Somehow, he'd managed to escape, taking advantage of their distraction while torturing other prisoners. Kim knew in that moment he needed to get this man out of the house, out of Nami. Surely, those same Kinpei-tai would be hot on his trail by now. He and his wife tried to help the man to his feet, but he was too weak and too much pain. They thought that perhaps, if they acted quickly, they could spirit the man away, help him stow away onto a train or even a donkey cart, disguised as a rice merchant. By the time they'd gotten him to his feet, it was already too late. The commotion was brewing outside. People were screaming, and the sounds of doors being smashed open permeated the intermittent thunder. This time, when the door sprang open, 2 uniformed Kinpei-tai entered. They spotted the man and ordered him handed over. Kim pled for his young companion, telling the policeman he couldn't possibly be a rebel. He's a school teacher, for God's sake, not a plotter. It was of no use. The policeman wrenched the young man from Kim's grasp, shoved him aside. He resisted, but was rebuffed by the butt of a rifle to the chest. Moments later, Kim and his entire family watched helplessly as the Kinpei-tai dragged the young man out into the rain and shot him. Kim, clutching his chest, rushed out and knelt beside the crumpled body of the young man and cursed the policeman in his native Korean. A crime that could land him in jail, interned, or worse. The officers turned their rifles on Kim, but Kang darted out in front of him, pleading mercy for her husband. She must have impressed them, at least somewhat. They waved her off, got into their jeep, and sped away. Their work here was done, and bullets were in short enough supply. The 2 youngest boys cried out hysterically for their mom and dad. Kang and Kim recited the 21st Psalm and prayed for the soul of the young man, dead in Kim's arms. Peeping from behind the door, silent, was little Kim Sung-ju. He didn't weep, or look away, or even blink. He just stood watching the young man's blood mix with the muddy sediment beneath him. It wasn't the first time he'd seen someone injured or even killed by the Kinpei-tai. It certainly wouldn't be the last. It was moments like these that must have driven him to swear that one day he would ensure that no one would sit powerlessly while invaders yanked men into the rain and shot them. Ironically, he would grow up to lead the most brutal dictatorial regime his nation had ever known. As a young military commander, he employed a policy of absolute authority and robot-like discipline to oust the Japanese invaders. His methods led him to be revered as a living deity and given names like the Great Marshal, the Great Commander, and the Eternal President. To the world, he was known by a different name, meaning something akin to Kim, become the sun. His name, of course, was Kim Il-sung. I'm Jeffrey McKelvin, and this is Divine Mortals, history's God Kings and the worlds they created.
Are you a God?
Yes.
And you will know my name is the Lord.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you ever so kindly for joining me here on the first episode, the maiden voyage of this here podcast. History is full of stories about power and destiny and faith being wrapped into a tightly woven little basket of psychopathy and illusion. But that's not what this podcast will be about. Yes, it will be a study in what I believe to be one of the most fascinating topics, that of the so-called God King, but I wanted to approach it from a different angle. One thing that historians and us armchair historians tend to miss is that these larger-than-life figures are surrounded by real, and by the standard of their era, very normal people who act in extraordinary ways based on their beliefs. I'm looking forward to a journey with you across all the corners of the globe and over a span of millennia, examining not just deified rulers, but the people closest to them and the circumstances around their lives that may have contributed to their rise to godhood. I know you will have a good time on this ride because I know that you like a challenge, and I have a challenge for you. It's quite easy to roll our eyes and sort of mock people who believe their rulers and kings and chiefs, priests, are semi-divine, divine, or even gods themselves. But I would challenge you to view these stories not through the lens of a cynical, instantly gratified, externally motivated modern-day man or woman. Keep in mind that no great empire, kingdom, civilization, at least not one that I can think of, rose without at least a partial focus on pleasing or appeasing or seeking the guidance or based on the guidance of God, gods, goddesses, or other deities. Spirituality and religion was the basis of life for most of human history, not in the peripheral, go to church on holidays sort of way we view it today, but it was embedded in their hopes for good harvests, healthy childbirths, and of course, favorable outcomes in war. To the people we'll examine, our modern cynicism, even those of us who are people of faith, would be off-putting and seem as naive and juvenile as we see them. So my challenge is for you to suspend your disbelief just a little, like when you watch a movie. You don't really think Harry Potter was hitting people with expecto patronums, even though you secretly tried it yourself, or maybe that was just me. But try to watch the world through the eyes of the people in the stories to get a better perspective on what life must have been like in the orbit of these godlike figures. When you were a child, someone told you, eat this, not that. Don't touch your eye. Don't stick anything in this hole, you'll be electrocuted. At the time, you didn't understand direct current and alternating current or voltage, or even pain for the most part. You just knew that someone you trusted and relied upon, who'd been mostly right so far, told you this was the way to believe and behave. Sure, I'll go along with it. The little substance of my life comes out of your boobs. It never occurred to you that a little sliver of the sun's power was zipping its way through the walls in your house, up a little string made from metal dug up from the earth itself, to be concentrated and distributed to light your house, or dry your hair, or charge your precious iPhone. To the ancients, that would be the appropriate way to think of it. That same brand of sun power is generated in a lump of meat encased in your skull and sent down to another lump of meat in your chest to make it spasm and pump this mysterious fluid through your body and make you alive. The sheer fragility and complexity of this great system would be enough to at least consider that if there was a God or gods behind it all, wouldn't it make sense to send someone to keep an eye on this grand investment and keep it all on track? If you own Pepsi, wouldn't you send some people to keep an eye on your many factories? Might you even show up yourself from time to time? My goal here with this podcast is not to convince you that these individuals were actually gods in their own rights, or to agree with the many horrific things that were done in their favor. My only aim is to show you that maybe the people around these figures might have real, meaningful, and relatable reasons for believing what they believe. That proximity to the divine is not just for rubes and backward-thinking savages, and that maybe, on some level, you might sense a little touch of the divine within you. This is Divine Mortals, Episode 1, The Eternal President and the Forgotten First Lady. He was not born a god. He was born on a quiet April morning in 1912, the son of a Christian schoolteacher in Japanese-occupied Korea. He would later insist that even the stars heralded his arrival. The truth was more modest, but truth would become optional in the story of Kim Il-sung. He was the eternal president, the shining son of Juche, the great leader who never made a mistake, never aged, never truly died. But even gods have wives, even gods have rivals. Behind the statues, beneath the slogans, are the people who lived with the man, not the myth. This is the story of Kim Il-sung, not told by his worshippers, but through the heartbreak of a forgotten first lady. This is the story of what it means to live with a god, to love him, serve him, and when it suits him, to disappear without a whisper. His early life was shaped by two forces, faith and resistance. Christianity in Korea was more than religion. It was a quietly defiant cultural force. Many Korean Christians, especially Protestants like Kim's family, were deeply tied to anti-Japanese activism and education. That made them targets. Young Kim lived in a world where even his language was forbidden. Japanese became the language of administration, of textbooks, of power. For a boy like him, it wasn't just hunger that threatened survival, it was erasure. Kinpei, the secret police of the Japanese Empire, ruled through fear. They used water torture, crushed bones between iron bars, electric shocks to the tongue and genitals. They pulled fingernails, forced prisoners to dig their own graves, and then left them alive, just enough to remember. Public beatings were common. Children were forced to bow to Japanese officials, swear allegiance to the emperor, and witness their elders humiliated in the streets. The Korean flag was outlawed. Shinto shrines were built, and school children were marched before them to perform forced rituals to foreign gods. Manchuria, 1933. The wind doesn't merely blow here, it hunts, screaming through the skeletal trees, carrying knives of cold that slice through clothing, flesh, resolve. This is a winter that kills the careless. Inside a rough-hewn wooden hut, 5 men sit in judgment of one. 21-year-old Kim Sung-ju feels the splinters of the crude wooden chair digging into his palms. His stomach is hollow from 3 days without proper food. His thoughts foggy from sleeplessness, but his eyes remain unnervingly clear. "You are accused of belonging to Minsengdan," announces the senior Chinese official. The word Minsengdan drops into the room like a death sentence. Kim can see dry blood caked beneath the fingernails of the interrogator across from him. Whose blood? Perhaps a comrade questioned yesterday. Perhaps someone who now lies in the frozen earth outside. A shot echoes through the mountains. Another Korean revolutionary dispatched. Another shallow grave to be covered by tomorrow's snow. Kim knows the calculation before him with perfect clarity. Speak wrongly now, and the next bullet is his.
산천은 험준하고 수목은 종자번디 만악은 운싸이고 정은붕어 바람이 질때 화초 묵시.
To understand the crucible that forged this young man, we must step back 2 decades to 1910, when the Imperial Japanese devoured Korea whole. Japanese soldiers goose-stepped through ancient Korean streets. Colonial administrators systematically dismantled a 5,000-year-old culture, stripping Koreans of their language, their names, their dignity, all under the banner of modernization. Schools became factories for producing obedient subjects. Farms became supply depots for the emperor's ambition. And the Korean people became ghosts in their own land, transparent and voiceless. By 1912, in the small village of Mangyongdae, Kim Song-ju's first memories were of this humiliation. His father's whispered stories of resistance came with warnings to speak softly, watch for informants. Childhood for Kim wasn't innocence. It was apprenticeship and oppression. By 15, he tasted the rage that comes with watching foreign soldiers strut through your homeland. By 18, he'd fled to Manchuria, hungry for revolution. His pockets were empty, but his mind was full of communist doctrine and nationalist dreams. September 18th, 1931, a night that would reshape Asia. Near Mukden, a small explosion, staged, deliberate, gave Japan its excuse. The imperial war machine roared to life. Japanese bombers growled across Manchurian skies. Artillery shattered the silence of ancient forests. Within 6 months, this vast territory, once sanctuary to Korean revolutionaries, had become just another jewel in Tokyo's blood-spattered crown. For Kim and his comrades, the ground beneath their feet was no longer just cold, it was hostile. Every village potentially harbored informants. Every mountain pass might conceal an ambush. The air itself seemed to carry Japan's reach. Yet it was here, hunted and desperate, that Kim Song-ju began to shine. In secret gatherings lit only by guttering candles, peasants and intellectuals alike found themselves drawn to the charismatic young Korean. His voice, not loud, but penetrating, painted visions of a Korea reborn. His eyes burned with conviction that warmed those who had forgotten how to hope. "We must forge our own path," he told them, his breath visible in the cold. "The Korean Revolution must be led by Koreans." Simple words, dangerous words. As Japanese pressure mounted, paranoia infected the Chinese communist ranks like a fever. Whispers of betrayal traveled on the same mountain winds that carried enemy planes. Someone was informing. Someone was betraying positions, plans, personnel. The Korean comrades, outsiders by blood and accent, became the natural suspects. And so began the Minsengdan witch hunt. Koreans who had fought alongside Chinese comrades for years were suddenly dragged from their beds, accused, tortured, executed. A madness of suspicion swept through the ranks. Now, in this stifling hut that stinks of fear and wood smoke, Kim Song-ju faces his accusers. His rapid rise had made him a target. His emphasis on Korean autonomy had raised suspicions. His very intelligence marked him as dangerous. You speak too much of Korean concerns, spits an accuser, a Korean himself, who saved his own skin by condemning others. Your nationalism betrays the international revolution. For 3 days and nights, they circle him with questions. They deprive him of sleep until the wooden walls seem to breathe. They promise mercy for confession, though the bodies piling up outside tell another story. Unlike others, Kim does not break, does not weep, does not confess to lies that might buy another day of life. Instead, he leans forward, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper, forcing his accusers to lean in as well. A masterstroke of psychological control. Comrades, he says, by executing loyal Korean revolutionaries, you performed the work of the Japanese Empire better than their own agents could hope to. Every patriot's body, cooling in the snow, is one less fighter against our true enemy. His gamble is absolute. Either his words will save him or condemn him finally. The tribunal withdraws, leaving Kim alone in the hut, listening to the winds howling like the cries he's heard from other interrogation cells. Hours stretch into an eternity. Through cracks in the wall, he watches the sun rise. Will he live to see this day end? The door swings wide. Kim's heart hammers against his ribs, but his face reveals nothing, a skill that will serve him well in the years to come. You are cleared, announces the senior official, voice flat with something. For now. Whether through eloquence, political cunning, or sheer force of will, Kim Song-ju survived when so many others perished, and in the vacuum created by their deaths, he began to rise. By 1935, the young revolutionary had shed his birth name. Now he called himself Kim Il-sung. Kim,
Become the sun.
a name that would eventually blaze across the consciousness of an entire nation. In the frozen forests of Manchuria, leading ragged bands of guerrillas against the Japanese imperial machine, he learned the lessons that would define his rule. Trust no one completely. Control must be absolute. Survival requires ruthlessness. And perhaps, most crucially, those who control the story control the future. The phoenix that rose from the ashes of the Minsingdan Purge, within a decade, would return to Korea as its new master. The young man who once sat trembling, though he would later deny he ever trembled, before a revolutionary tribunal, would build a state where he alone would sit in judgment. The seeds of North Korea's future were planted not in ideology or grand strategy, but in these moments of raw survival. A young man learned that power, once grasped, must never be relinquished. The harsh winter wind swept across Pyongyang's snow-covered streets in 1948, forcing a young woman to tighten her simple wool coat around her slender frame. Kim Song-ae, barely 20 years old, hurried through the capital of the newly established Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The city still bore the scars of war, bombed-out buildings, and hastily repaired infrastructure. But there was an undeniable energy of rebirth in the air. Sung-ae clutched her documents closer to her chest. Today was her first day working in the government offices, and she couldn't afford to be late. The position as secretary to Kim Jong-suk, wife of the nation's leader, Kim Il-sung, represented not just employment, but a near miraculous escape from the crushing poverty that had defined her early life. While Kim Il-sung had been navigating the treacherous world of revolutionary politics in Manchuria in the 1930s, Sung-ae's early life unfolded in dramatically different circumstances. Born around 1928 in what is now North Korea's South Pyongan province, she entered a world already under the yoke of Japanese colonial rule. Unlike Kim's family, which had revolutionary credentials, according to official North Korean histories, Sung-ae's background was ordinary. Her parents were likely poor farmers or laborers struggling to survive under the harsh economic exploitation of the Japanese regime. While young Kim Sung-ju was delivering passionate speeches to guerrilla fighters in Manchurian forests, young Sung-ae was probably helping her family eke out a subsistence living. The Japanese-imposed agricultural policies had transformed Korea into a rice basket for the empire, forcing Korean farmers to export their best crops while often subsisting on millet and barley themselves. In rural areas, education for girls was limited, and Korean language and culture were systematically suppressed in favor of Japanese customs and language. Yet Sung-ae possessed qualities that would later serve her well: quiet determination, acute observation skills, and an intuitive understanding of power relationships. While her exact educational background remains obscure in historical records, she must have obtained enough literacy and clerical skills to later qualify for government employment. No small feat for a young woman from a rural background, not in that era. The liberation of Korea from Japanese rule in August 1945 brought dramatic changes throughout the peninsula. For the first time in her young life, Sung-ae heard public speeches in Korean and saw Korean flags flying freely. The defeat of Japan had created a power vacuum that was quickly filled by competing foreign influences, the Soviets in the north and the Americans in the south. As Kim Il-sung was being positioned by Soviet authorities as the leader of Northern Korea in 1945, returning as a revolutionary hero after years in exile, teenage Sung-ae was likely witnessing the societal transformation with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. North Korean propaganda later claimed that Sung-ae had participated in revolutionary activities during this period, possibly to legitimize her eventual position as the leader's wife. However, most historical analyses suggest she was simply one of many young Koreans caught up in the tumultuous post-liberation period, trying to find her place in this rapidly changing society. Sung-ae's journey from rural obscurity to employment in the government offices of Pyongyang remains largely undocumented. Did she attend one of the new revolutionary schools established after liberation? Was she recruited through Workers' Party youth organizations? Did a perceptive local official notice her abilities and recommend her advancement? Historical records are silent on these details. What is known is that by 1948, as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was formally established, with Kim Il-sung as its premier, Sung-ae had secured a position as a secretary in the government offices, specifically assigned to work with Kim Sung-juk, Kim Il-sung's first wife and a revolutionary heroine in her own right. The woman to whom Sung-ae reported, Kim Jong-suk, was everything the young secretary was not. A celebrated anti-Japanese guerrilla fighter, a revolutionary with impeccable credentials, and the mother of Kim Jong-il, who would eventually succeed his father as North Korea's leader. Official North Korean accounts describe Jong-suk as an exceptional marksman, a fearless fighter, and a devoted revolutionary who had fought alongside her husband in the Manchurian wilderness. Sung-ae observed the First Lady with a mixture of awe and careful study. Jong-suk embodied the regime's ideal of revolutionary womanhood, strong, committed to the cause, yet ultimately subservient to the great leader. In her daily work, Sung-ae would have witnessed the inner workings of power at the highest levels of the new North Korean state. The offices where Sung-ae worked buzzed with the energy of nation building. Revolutionary slogans adorned the walls, meetings ran late into the night, and there was a genuine belief among many that they were creating a new society, free from foreign domination and class exploitation. For a young woman from a humble background, The atmosphere must have been intoxicating. While carrying out her clerical duties, arranging schedules, taking notes, transmitting messages, Sung-ae was receiving an education in power that no school could provide. She was learning how the inner circle around Kim Il-sung operated, how decisions were made, how favor was gained and lost. These lessons would serve her well in the years to come. While Kim Il-sung was becoming increasingly mythologized in North Korean propaganda, his Manchurian exploits already transforming into legendary tales of revolutionary heroism, Sung-ae was quietly establishing herself as efficient, discreet, and utterly reliable in her modest role. In September 1949, events took a dramatic turn that would alter the trajectory of Sung-ae's life forever. Kim Jong-suk died unexpectedly at the age of 31, reportedly due to complications from pregnancy. Her death created not just personal grief for Kim Il-sung, but also a vacuum in both his domestic life and in the symbolic role of revolutionary female leadership. In the aftermath of this tragedy, Sung-ae's role naturally expanded. As someone already familiar with Jong-suk's work and responsibilities, she was positioned to take on additional duties. This period marked the beginning of her transition from a clerical worker to a figure of increasingly personal importance to the great leader himself. The young secretary likely demonstrated exceptional tact and sensitivity during this difficult period, managing Kim Il-sung's office affairs while he grieved, ensuring his young son Jong-il was looked after, and handling matters that the distracted leader might overlook. All these tasks would have brought her into more frequent and direct contact with Kim Il-sung. Oh, just imagine the gossip. North Korean sources are unsurprisingly silent about the precise evolution of their relationship from professional to personal. The official narrative acknowledges only that Sung-ae worked with Comrade Kim Il-sung during this period, with no mention of romantic development. But sometime between Jong-suk's death in 1949 and 1952, their relationship clearly transcended the professional boundaries. Oh, imagine the gossip. As the devastating Korean War erupted in June 1950, plunging the peninsula back into bloodshed, the personal connection between Kim Il-sung and his reliable secretary was deepening. While Kim directed military operations and navigated the complex relationships with his Chinese and Soviet allies, Sung-ae reportedly became a source of stability and comfort in his tumultuous life. The war years forced Kim and his inner circle, likely including Sung-ae, to relocate frequently to avoid American bombing campaigns. These circumstances, living in mountain hideouts, working from makeshift headquarters, sharing the hardships of war, may have accelerated their personal connection. Crisis has a way of stripping away formalities and revealing true character. And Sung-ae apparently proved her worth during these difficult times. By the time an armistice halted the fighting in July 1953, Sung-ae had reportedly become Kim's companion. Though their relationship remained unpublicized, North Korea had suffered immense destruction. Pyongyang itself had been reduced largely to rubble, and the task of reconstruction demanded full attention. While Kim Il-sung was being elevated to near-divine status in the burgeoning North Korean cult of personality, presented as the brilliant commander whose leadership had fought the American imperialists to a standstill, Sung-ae remained largely invisible to the public eye, her growing influence confined to private spaces. The exact timing of Kim Il-sung and Sung-ae's marriage remains unclear in the historical records, with some sources suggesting 1952 and others pointing to 1953 or even later. What is clear is that the relationship was not publicly acknowledged for many years. Kim Jong-il, the son from Kim's first marriage, was being groomed as successor, and highlighting a new maternal figure might have complicated the official narrative. For Sung-ae, this period must have been complex emotionally. she had risen to an extraordinary position of private influence while remaining publicly invisible. She was the wife of the most powerful man in North Korea, yet her role was unacknowledged in official propaganda. She had access to luxuries unimaginable to ordinary North Koreans suffering through post-war privation, yet she could not openly claim her status. By the early 1960s, Sang-ae had given birth to 3 children with Kim Il-sung, sons Kim Pyong-il and Kim Yong-il, and daughter Kim Kyung-jin. Though these children would never attain the status of their half-brother Jong-il in the succession hierarchy, their existence gradually forced a more public acknowledgement of Sang-ae's role. Imagine keeping 3 young kids quiet enough to hide them from the public. The first official appearance of Sang-ae as Kim's wife reportedly came during a diplomatic reception in 1965. Even then, she was introduced simply as Comrade Kim Sang-ae, without explicit reference to her marital status. #It's complicated. Throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, Sang-ae's public profile gradually increased. She began appearing at state functions, greeting foreign dignitaries, and eventually assumed the leadership of the Korean Democratic Women's Union, an important mass organization for advancing the regime's policies among women. For the former secretary who had once hurried through Pyongyang streets, clutching her documents, life had transformed beyond recognition. Now she moved through the capital in chauffeur-driven vehicles, resided in luxurious compounds, and commanded immediate deference from government officials who had once been her superiors. While Kim Il-sung was portrayed in ever more grandiose terms by the state propaganda machine as a military genius, a theoretical innovator, the benevolent father of the nation, Sang-ae carved out her own modest public role, always careful to remain in her husband's shadow while quietly wielding considerable behind-the-scenes influence. Sang-ae's rise coincided with increasing tensions within the Kim family. As Kim Jong-il consolidated his position as his father's successor throughout the 1970s, relations with his stepmother reportedly deteriorated. The younger Kim is said to have viewed Sang-ae and her children as potential threats to his inheritance of power, despite their relatively minor public roles. For Sang-ae, whose life journey had taken her from obscurity to the center of power, this period likely brought bittersweet realizations. She had achieved extraordinary upward mobility in a society increasingly defined by rigid hierarchy. She had found romance with the nation's supreme leader. She had borne his children and achieved public recognition. Yet the limits of her rise were becoming increasingly apparent. As Kim Jong-il's influence grew through the 1970s and early 1980s, Sang-ae's public appearances became less frequent. Her position as head of the Women's Union was eventually taken over by other figures closer to the heir apparent. Her children were assigned positions abroad, effectively removing them from the center of power in Pyongyang. By the time Kim Il-sung died in 1994, Sang-ae had already largely retreated from public view. The woman who had once been a simple secretary, who had caught the eye of the great leader, who had risen to become North Korea's acknowledged First Lady, now faced an uncertain future under her stepson's rule. The subsequent decades brought further marginalization. After having experienced one of the most remarkable rises in North Korean history, Sang-ae reportedly spent her later years in increasing isolation. Watched closely by her stepson's security apparatus, her movements restricted, her influence nullified.
Our leader faces many enemies,
she might have whispered to herself as reports of another purge reached her ears.
He must be ruthless to protect our revolution.
By focusing on Kim's charisma, his reported brilliance, and his personal kindness to her and their children, Sang-ae could perhaps construct a mental firewall between the man she knew privately and the dictator known to history. There was another, more pragmatic factor reinforcing her loyalty: survival. Sung-ae had witnessed firsthand what happened to those who fell from favor. The alternatives to compliance were imprisonment, exile, or death, not just for herself, but potentially for her children. Sung-ae's position was perpetually precarious. Around her swirled courtiers and officials who viewed her influence with jealousy and her children as threats to their own ambitions. These potential enemies constantly sought opportunities to undermine her standing with Kim. "The great leader seems troubled after his meeting with Comrade Sung-ae," a vice minister might casually mention to a security official. "Perhaps her family background deserves another review." Kim Jong-il, her stepson, reportedly viewed her with particular suspicion. As he consolidated his position as heir apparent throughout the 1970s, he systematically marginalized Sung-ae and her children, recognizing them as potential alternate succession candidates. The slightest misstep, a casual comment questioning a policy decision, appearing too ambitious in public, or forming alliances with the wrong officials, could be twisted by her enemies into evidence of disloyalty. In a system where paranoia was institutionalized and where Kim Il-sung's favor meant the difference between luxury and labor camp, Sung-ae navigated treacherous waters daily. As the palace banquets continued and the prison camps filled, her husband was cheered by orchestrated crowds while dissenters were tortured in basement cells. Sung-ae maintained her public smile. Behind that carefully composed expression lay calculations of survival, moral compromises, and perhaps, in the darkest hours of night, moments of doubt about the revolution she had devoted her life to serving. The exact details of her later life remain obscure to outside observers. Some reports suggest she lived under a form of house arrest. Others indicate she was merely sidelined politically while retaining material comforts. What seems certain is that her extraordinary journey from humble origins to the apex of North Korean society and back to the margins remains one of the most remarkable yet little-known personal stories of North Korea's dynastic regime. The young woman who had once hurried through Pyongyang's snowy streets, nervously anticipating her first day as a government secretary, could never have imagined the heights to which she would rise, nor the limitations she would ultimately face. Her story of ambition, opportunity, romance, power, and ultimately constraint mirrors in many ways the trajectory of North Korea itself, a promise of transformation that ultimately calcified into rigid hierarchy and dynastic rule. The mythology surrounding Kim Il-sung permeated daily peasant life in concrete ways. Every home was required to display portraits of Kim Il-sung and later Kim Jong-il, which had to be cleaned daily with special cloths. Before meals, families were expected to give thanks to the leader for providing their food. Work units began the day with study of Kim's writings and thoughts. Loudspeakers broadcast stories of Kim's greatness throughout villages. "Thank you, Father Kim Il-sung," became a common expression following receipt of any benefit, no matter how small. Special events in Kim's life, birthdays, revolutionary anniversaries, were major holidays requiring participation in celebrations, often at significant personal expense for gifts and special clothing. Any misfortune or hardship was framed as an opportunity to demonstrate greater loyalty, to overcome obstacles, as the great leader would want. For peasants, the practical impact of this mythology included sacrificing personal resources for community celebrations honoring Kim, spending significant time in ideological study rather than productive labor, and the psychological burden of constant vigilance against expressing any doubt about official narratives. But what about the woman who once held his hand, who bore his children, who typed his speeches and stood in his shadow? Kim Sang-ae faded from public view in the late 1970s. Reports suggest she lived until 2014, forgotten in a villa near Pyongyang, alive but erased from the national story.